Dublab.
All right, next, our first console talk of the day. We have the Security Distillery back here with us, and they will be talking about the future of privacy and AI. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. We are here. I am Dolores.
I'm Susanna.
And I'm Chiara.
And we are joined today by Jan Ellerman. Thank you so much for being with us today. Jan is a specialist at Europol Data Protection Function, and we are here to talk a little bit more about the practical implementations of data, of AI, how it can be seen for the future, but also I think in the conference we've seen a lot of how it is in the law aspect, how the regulations have been, but I think it's very, very interesting to have the perspective of people who implement it and who actually who work on it. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to sit here with you. I find this very inspiring. That's also one of the things I love most about CPDP, that it's not the traditional conference setting where you come into a room, in the worst case, without any windows, and then there's the desk in the front, and there are a few panelists all in suits, and in the end it's sometimes a bit boring. So this whole setting here already is very encouraging and enriching, and of course I'm happy to try to use my crystal ball here to look into the future of privacy together with you.
So we all followed your panel on responsible AI in law enforcement, and it was really interesting. And in the end, there were some interesting, critical, controversial questions, especially regarding transparency. So we were wondering, also given that we study intelligence, and so we talked about how too much information can actually be a problem. We were wondering to what extent is transparency good, and where is the line where it becomes too much and it might create pitfalls?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I thank you very much for joining the panel as well. So I enjoyed this panel a lot. At some point I thought I was a bit concerned that we might agree on too many topics. And also the first critical remark there was that the Fundamental Rights Agency was represented, a Europol colleague of mine was there, and then the FRA and Europol didn't fight. So one of the participants then seemed to be a bit upset. Yeah, shouldn't it be different? Shouldn't FRA be punching Europol and so on and so forth? On this one, I'm happy, let's say, that we have a healthy collaboration. Of course, you always have to be ready to face criticism, and that's, I think, another element which makes CPDP is so important, that it's really a space where, let's say, regulators meet with practitioners such as myself, meet with young people like yourselves who organize think tanks such as Security Distillery. But then you also have people who are really activists, and they are wholehearted activists. So, and that for me is also enriching, even though there was a second intervention which was quite strong, so that young woman was quite loaded, so you could feel there was quite a level of frustration towards what Europol is doing. But that is also good, because I think that's something which really draws the distinction between how we are doing things here in Europe and how things are being done in totalitarian regimes, such as in China or in Russia. We couldn't have such a talk in China. We couldn't have such a talk in Russia. And in Russia, no young woman would have the possibility to stand up against a kind of government agency, if we want to frame Europol as such, and then voice this kind of criticism. So the fact that we can do that alone, I think, is already an achievement. And then content-wise, because the panel was about responsible use of AI in law enforcement, my argument was that ultimately, to me, it seems rather clear as law enforcement we can't do without artificial intelligence. And that has to do with the ever-increasing amounts of personal data we have to handle. I mean, all of us live in a digital society. All of us, I see, I don't know, two smartphones here on the table, the rest, all of you holding one or in your pocket. So we are all generating loads of data, and that also means in law enforcement, basically, we are exposed to more data if you want or not. And then there were a couple of investigations which were really game changers for Europol also. So I'm just briefly going to explain what this is about. So some of you might have heard about EncroChat. So EncroChat was a communication service provider which advertised their services in particular to organized crime groups along the lines of, if you use our phone, it's bulletproof, it cannot be surveyed by law enforcement. And then Dutch and French law enforcement found a way, you could argue, to hack into that system. So that was a treasure trove for law enforcement because criminals were communicating amongst each other, deeming themselves in a safe haven. So we've never seen something like this before. We were provided with a raw data set as Europol, and here we're talking 60 million messages. Later on, the EncroChat went down, was seized by law enforcement, and then the refugees were looking for a new place, and many of them landed on a similar provider, Sky ECC. Mm-hmm. Same story. At some point, I think Dutch law enforcement again, in collaboration with the French, they also managed to take control of that server. You can imagine that when EncroChat users migrated to Sky ECC, there was some enthusiasm on our corridors along the lines of refugees welcome. Yeah. And but in the Sky ECC context, we were looking at volumes of 500 million messages. So that's 500 million messages which you somehow need to analyze. And the aim we had here, our first task was to identify threats to life. So our goal was within these 60 million and later 500 million messages as quickly as possible to identify those messages where one individual would announce to do harm, to kill another individual. And for that purpose at Europol we started developing machine learning tools. So basically tools which allow us to the machine to go through all those millions of messages and to tell the human analyst, you may want to look at these 2,000 first. So that was the story where I said I think use of AI by law enforcement is inevitable, but also conscious of the fact that this is a critical matter. Of course, we have a process to follow, and that took a time. You know the story. Yeah. That was a bit the playing field of the panel.
I'm sorry, is it bulletproof? Like, it happens that maybe, yes, you have 200 million that are like, or 200 messages that are like detected. Is it possible that also some are not? So what do you do if then you leave someone out?
So your question is basically, how can you be sure that all of the users are criminals, right? Yeah.
No. How can you be sure that if you actually ask the machine, detect the texts that might be possible for like hurting someone, is it possible that the machine leaves something out?
Yeah, of course that's possible, and that's a process to get there. So when we are talking machine learning and when we are talking algorithms, you need to train these algorithms. So there was no algorithm out there which you could use off the shelf to say, please scrutinize these messages and identify threats to life. So first you need humans who have some experience and who say, okay, what does a threat to life look like? And you might look at text. So of course a criminal rarely says, I will kill you. Okay, you will kill you will have kill as a word in your list for training the data, but you also need to talk about make him disappear, neutralize, whatever the criminal slang might be. That's one element, but and those algorithms we were working on. Then there are other elements. You may want to look for certain pictures. For instance, pictures showing torture. So when I was consulted as a member of Europol's Data Protection Function on these machine learning models, I asked, okay, what types of algorithms are we talking about here? And then interestingly, the answer from our data scientists was, well, we are just working on one model which identifies nudity. And then I said, I beg your pardon? Because I knew that EncroChat data was not about sexual exploitation of children whatsoever, so that was not our intelligence. Mm-hmm. So I wondered really, why the heck are you looking for nudity? Like, okay, criminals exchange nudes of their girlfriends amongst each other, but that's none of the business of our analysts. So it might be interesting, but it's not our business. So I was a bit concerned, but then they explained to me, well, the pattern and why we're interested in nudity is that usually before you kill somebody in these groups, you humiliate the other party. So you will strip those individuals off their clothes. You will put them on the floor naked to humiliate them. And that is a part, let's say, usually torture is involved. But that is a part basically where if you can quickly pull out all the nudity pictures, you will have quite a number of those with naked individuals with their hands tied on their back on the floor, where we know the next step is they will be killed.
Okay, thank you very much. That is very interesting.
Oh.
I guess when we talk about Europol and the use of data by law enforcement, it kind of always strikes out the fact that you have to train and prepare officers before doing so. But how is the process of like the differences in training processes from officers from different countries? We know that the Netherlands has a very extensive like high-tech law enforcement unit, but there are several countries that are members that do not. So how do you ensure that there's like that standard?
Yeah. That's a good question. So let me start from the data protection angle. So first of all, of course, also in terms of data protection, you still have quite a landscape across the EU, even though in the law enforcement field, you have the law enforcement directive, the implementation, and also the culture of implementing that differs. At Europol, we have a lex specialis. We are subject, our processing operations are subject to the Europol regulation and the EU data protection regulation, the EU DPR, which is the equivalent to the GDPR, as you know. It's a complex legal framework, but our aim is basically to train our people on what is applicable to Europol in the first place. So the good news here is nobody will put a finger on a keyboard at Europol without having first completed a data protection training. Okay, yeah. So your question, of course, I listened carefully, was more on like investigative expertise and standards. So I'm not that much the topic matter or subject matter expert on that domain, but what I can share with you is that at Europol, not only for data protection, but of course for all kinds of areas of interest, our people run through an introductory program, which is about 2.5 weeks, basically, where they just run from one session to the next. In how far that also covers, let's say, investigative techniques, I'm not that sure, because I think in that domain we probably also benefit from the fact that people have different strengths, which they all bring to the organization in one way.
I mean, different backgrounds really strengthen an organization, which is good. It's just...
Okay, and I have a more like final sort of question. Like, I think in this conference we talked a lot about like good AI or bad AI in a way. And up to now, especially with like perspective of Europol and crime, also online crime or not, do you think AI worsened the situation? So is not the situation worse, or is the impact of AI better in a way that it helps way more than what it damages?
It's a very good question, and I think the answer is both is true. Because what I tried to explain to you and also throughout the panel was mainly focused on how can AI help us as law enforcement, and that is one side of the medal. But the other side of the medal is also that AI changes the way organized crime works or how criminals act. So one very simple example, so if you look a bit out there, if you Google it, you will find a knowledge product from Europol which is out there on the criminal potential use or criminal use of ChatGPT. Where in the past, basically, if you wanted to commit online fraud and you wanted to set up a website for this purpose, those websites were usually quite easy to identify because they were not very professional. There were sometimes spelling mistakes in that, all looked a bit fishy, so comparatively easy to identify. Nowadays, if you use ChatGPT, you can try it yourself and you say, create a website, introductory remarks for a bank, and the bank happens to be called ABN AMRO. Please provide me with a code for that website. Well, that might work. It has worked. So basically, of course, also ChatGPT is conscious of that, and they try to prevent criminal abuse, but it's a game of cat and mouse, and it's comparatively easy to circumvent. Other example would be recipes for chemical bombs and so on and so forth. All of that is out there. You need to
pose the right question.
It's a very complex issue. Well, I think our time is almost up, but thank you so much for joining us and for enlightening us in
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.